Hi, everyone. This is Betsy Wurzel, your host of Chatting with Betsy on Passionate Rural Talk Radio, where our mantra is to educate, enlighten, and entertain. The views of the guest may not represent those of the station or the host. Always talk to your primary care physician about any medical or mental health issues. Folks, I love what I do. I really do. And I'm so blessed and grateful to meet wonderful people. I have with me today a fellow Jersey gal. Yay for New Jersey. And I am grateful that I meet wonderful resources. One of the reasons for chatting with Betsy is to provide people with resources that I wish I knew when my husband Matt was alive. And I just feel so grateful to be able to provide resources to you, the audience, so you can have a better life, so your loved one that you're caring for can have a better life. Because I'm going to tell you something from my own experience. When you have education as a caregiver, not only do you have a better life and you're less stressed, so does your loved one. And from my mom-in-law, when there was no information out there 20 years ago, no help, no resources, to when Matt was diagnosed, it was a little better, more information, still wasn't the resources like there is now. I was a better caregiver. I was able to handle Matt's behaviors better because I was educated. And I just have to say that. With me today is a phenomenal guest, as I always have phenomenal guests on my show. My guest today is Debra Hallisey. She is from New Jersey. She is a certified caregiving consultant. She is an author and writer of 2 books. That is Contract for Dementia Caregivers, Navigating the Complexities and Challenges of Caregiving for the Memory Impaired. She also has your Caregiver Relationship Contract, How to Navigate the Minefield of New Roles and Expectations. The books are available in Spanish and English. That is very cool. And Debra also has her own business, Advocate for Mom and Dad. And I want to welcome Debra Hallisey to Chatting with Betsy.
Oh, Betsy, thank you so much for the opportunity to talk with you and to help you reach out to folks in the community and get them educated. You are absolutely right. That can make all the difference in the world when you are really in the turmoil and kind of the tornado of caregiving. So anything that I can do to help you help people, I am happy to.
Oh, thank you so much, Deb, and thank you for coming on my show. I'm so glad we connected, and I wish I knew of you. How long have you had your business, Advocate for Mom and Dad? And how did you start it? We'll start with that first.
And how did I start it? So the business is now 7 years old. And it came out from, it is an outgrowth of being a caregiver and losing my job because of being a caregiver. I was a caregiver for 8 years, first to my dad for a year and then to my mom for 7. And when my dad died and I became my mom's caregiver, I actually had been a consultant doing training and change management. And my firm gave me about 3 months at home to get my mom settled. But at the end of the year, when they did not make their numbers, I lost my job because I had not contributed my numbers to it. You know, it's a whole consulting thing with how much you have to bill and stuff. And I was looking for a job in my field of training and change management. And my mother said to me, "You have learned so much, you should share it with people." And that was really the start of Advocate for Mom and Dad.
That is very cool in so many ways because, you know, I believe when one door closes, We lost your job due to caregiving. That's very common. We lose our jobs or have to take less hours. And you made a business. You started your own business. And I'm going to say this, Deb, because I strongly feel this way, and this is my own opinion. I tell the audience this all the time. If I was looking for a caregiving consultant, I want someone who's walked the walk. They know what you're going through, rather than someone who just has book knowledge. I don't want just book knowledge. I want someone who's been in the trenches. And you 100%. Are that person. You are that person. And 7 years, see, I wish I knew about you with Matt. This is, you're a resource I could have used. And go ahead.
I was going to say, and it's interesting because I started this really as a writer, writing a blog for adult children of aging parents, strictly to educate. And then that grew into doing some consulting work, and then that grew into the books and, and webinars and training and things like that. But, you're right when you say when a window closes, a door open, or when a door closes, a window opens. You really don't know where things will take you. And I've had clients say to me, "Oh, you understand. You get it." And been there. I do get it. And so thank you for that. It means a lot to me that someone who is also a caregiver understands how important it is to just be with someone who understands and can guide you through some of that kind of tornado of caregiving.
Yes. I say that with every person that comes on who was a caregiver and who has a consulting business, 100%. I would go to that person before I would go to someone who has no experience as a caregiver. And as a matter of fact, I'm going to suggest to the audience, if you're looking for a caregiving consultant, ask that person, what's their experience on a personal level? Don't be afraid. And if they don't want to answer you, then, check mark, go to another person. Because I feel that strongly I'd want someone who knows how I feel and what's going on. Because as well as you know, Deb, that book knowledge is one thing, living it is another. It's two different
100%.
Scenarios there. And do you help people navigate like hospice or placement?
So what I do, there's two things that I do. I help people find resources. So if someone were to say to me, we're not sure what to do, we're thinking of home care, then I will educate them on that whole area of caregiving. Most people don't even realize that home care is private pay. Medicare does not pay for it. Many don't even take long-term care insurance. So helping them to understand financially what it means, helping them to understand the difference between going to an agency and hiring somebody privately, what I'll call the gray market, and the impact down the road that can have on Medicaid, helping people to understand that, agencies are going to oftentimes look for a minimum 3 to 4 hours, and that if you only want 3 or 4 hours 2 days a week, there's a good likelihood that the person you get will change often because there's a lack of home health aides and they have a lot of scheduling problems. So it's getting them to understand the system and then working for them to identify what works best for you within this system. And what always comes up often is family communications. Well, my sister or brother doesn't understand, or, I need to tap into mom's money and they're going to fight me on that. So it's not only navigating, understanding the healthcare system they're trying to tap into, but understanding the relationships that are impacted by the whole caregiving experience. And
that is definitely true, because you get into, the scenario of, well, no, mom and dad, they didn't want that, and, they didn't want to be placed or, anything. This is why I also always say you have to have end-of-life planning. You have to have these discussions with the family so that everybody knows what mom and dad want at the end of their life. Not a pleasant conversation, but a necessary one.
No, and it's so interesting you should bring that up, Betsy, because that's what I call an intentional conversation, right? Like, the intent is that you want to get to a point where you know what mom and dad want for end of life, or even maybe starting off with, how do you want to live out your life? Do you still want to go to church? Do you still want to play cards? Because that's what you start to plan for. If they can no longer drive, what do we do? How do we still help them to live out their best life? And those are such hard conversations because everybody brings to it their own personal experience within the family. And one of the things that I know to be true is, I don't care if there were 2 children or 10, every single child in that family had a different childhood. And they bring to that this discussion, right? Isn't that crazy?
Oh, that is so true, Deb. So true.
You would think with the same parents it would be the same, but no, it's birth order, it's gender, it's mom was sick as a dog with you and she wasn't with me, it's you're the first grandchild and so you were the baby of everyone, or the queen or the king of everyone. Work was easy, schoolwork was easy for me and not for you. Like, it's all those dynamics that get brought forward into these discussions, which is part of what makes it so hard. And so, one of the things that both books talk about is an intentional conversation requires you need to be careful of the language. You have to choose the time and place you're going to have it. You have to understand the motivation of the person you're trying to get to say yes to your request. And you need to recognize it's not a one-and-done conversation. You're going to have it multiple times, in multiple ways, in multiple places, before you can get from no to yes.
Yes, and it's very, very important. And you're so right about birth order. Now, when I asked my mom what would she like when she could no longer care for herself, she got very defensive, did not like the fact that I mentioned it, and she was determined she's going to stay in her house. Well, fast forward, many years later, and now she's in her 90s and alone, she was starting to fall. And my younger brother, who's the king, could do no wrong, had, suggested assisted living, and she was willing to look. She didn't like any place that my brother showed her, and then her friend went to an assisted living, and she liked that place. But when my mother fell again, my brother said, that's it, you have to go. You're not safe. And, of course, then she listened. If I would have said you had to go into assisted living, she would have had a conniption. So that's so true. Gender, birth order. Very, very true. I wanted to get to your books, Debra, as to your first book. I love the name of it, Contract for Dementia Caregiver. I think it's I can't read my own handwriting. The Caregivers.
A relationship contract for dementia caregivers, yeah.
Thank you. I can't read my own handwriting.
Yeah.
And I love that. Can you, I'd like to know what motivated you to write your books, and how did you come about that? Because, you know what, sometimes we need a contract for our own mental sanity and physical health.
Yes. So the first book was actually a relationship contract, was the other book. Now I can't remember the name of it. Good Lord, I published the stupid thing. Oh, my gosh. Your Relationship Contract. It was actually the first book. And that so as a blogger, there was about 6 or 7 blog posts I wrote that really, really resonated with my readers. And that actually became the first book, because what I came to realize in being Mom's caregiver is that every relationship is a contract, and that when you become a caregiver, caregiving changes that contract. I'll give you an example. My dad was my mom's caregiver because she was legally blind with mobility issues and a diabetic. And when he got sick and went in the hospital for 2 weeks in November 2014, I moved into my mom's house, went to the hospital, continued to work. It was my mother caregiver for those 2 weeks. And they had this routine at night that had like 6 steps to it. And by the time the nighttime came around, I was exhausted, and the thoughts of having to do all that before I could go to bed would make me so angry and so resentful. And it dawned on me that I could not keep up the routine, the contract, if you will, that my mother and father had had. And so I had to ask my mother to change something. And I asked her to change one thing in that routine to make it easier on me. And we had to negotiate and talk about it, but she did. And so what I realized is we all have these unspoken expectations of one another. And my mother's expectation was that I could continue to care for her the way my dad did. And initially, I thought the same thing. And what did I know? This is the way you cared for Mom. But then I came to realize that for my own mental health and physical health, I couldn't keep that contract up. And so that was just one blog post. Then I started thinking about when you ask, and why are we so bad at asking for and saying yes to help, both the caregiver and the person you're caring for. And I realized that one of the reasons is, or one of the ways to get beyond that is a system or a way of asking for help that I call SMART. And it comes from the corporate world. You want to make the ask specific, measurable, attainable, achievable, and timely. So here's the difference. The difference is somebody says, "Can I help you?" "Oh, my gosh, yes." "Can you walk the dog for me?" "Sure, I can do that." But then you get into the nitty-gritty, and you need them to walk the dog Tuesdays and Thursdays between 5 and 7, and all of a sudden there's a conflict, and they can't do it. So the more specific you can make the ask, the more you have the ability for somebody to say yes or no in a way that makes them feel good, and that if you need to, you can negotiate. And so that book is a series of stories from my mom and I wrapped around the ideas of setting boundaries. Excuse me just a sec. True. Betsy knows I'm just off of getting sick, so once in a while
okay.
my voice gets funky.
That's right. I cough all the time. Yep.
So how do you set boundaries? How do you recognize expectations? How do you ask for and say yes to help? How do you deal with emotions? How do you set up your own support system? That book is out in English and Spanish, and a dear friend who's helped me write a bunch of dementia blog posts came to me and said, this book needs to be rewritten for dementia caregivers. And that's how the second book came into being.
Wow. That is really, you're a force, Debra, a good force, because we need this. There are so many people that I meet, like in stores, and just they don't know about resources. They really don't. And I was in a pharmacy last week, and Matt used to say, I know no strangers. I was talking to the guy, who's working at the post office area, and he told me his mom has a pancreatic cancer. And I said, do you have help? Do you know about resources? And he goes, well, my sister's the caregiver, and I gave him the number of Caregiver to Caregivers, which is here in New Jersey. And he said, oh, thank you. People don't know about resources in their own backyard. I didn't.
They really, really don't. And that's, at the end of the book, there's a bunch of both books, there's a bunch of resources. And once you start pulling that thread, you find more and more. But most people are sitting there going, where do I start? Just where do I start? That's the eternal question. So
yes.
Yeah.
That is
it's
very
interesting.
True.
Because,
yes,
go ahead.
I was going to say, I wish neurologists, especially neurologists, but any really primary care physician, I wished they had a pamphlet when someone gets diagnosed with any kind of dementia, that they can have a pamphlet saying, here's what you should do. Get your power of attorney. Here's the resources in the area. Of course, it would have to be specific to each area, but something to help a caregiver.
Betsy, I would say I wish they would take a step back and really listen to the caregiver.
Yes.
This second book also came about because I've had clients who care for someone with dementia. And I'm just thinking of one client in particular who was starting to notice some real changes, but was like saying, oh, but, you don't want to notice when things are changing.
Right.
And so it was like, but it's, it's this. There's always a reason why it changes. And so, and that may be valid, but don't bury your head in the sand. And so One of the things I asked, right, was to say, okay, I want you to do just a little journal every day. And then I want you to look at it and see where the patterns are, see where things are changing. And when you go to the neurologist, bring that with you and talk to him about it. And she says to him, I think I've been writing down things that have been happening and changing. And the response was, oh, that's good for you. No, you need to know what's happening in this caregiver's daily life so you can provide them the resources or help them interpret what's going on.
Yes, I agree 100%. They need to listen. All to doctors, nurses, social workers need to listen to the caregiver because we know our loved ones better than anyone. And
100%. Yep.
I told the caregiver, not the caregiver, I told the social worker, the hospice social worker that because she didn't believe me. Well, we unfortunately had the home hospice and hell experience. She didn't believe me that Matt was agitated. They didn't believe me that he was terminally agitated, that he was dying. And for a social worker to say to me, when I told him Matt had a headache, oh, no, he can't have a headache. Are you serious? Who are you to say that someone can't have a headache? I mean, I would imagine that when someone's brain is dying, there could be pain. And for someone who doesn't complain, like Matt never complained, for him to say that, clear as day, then he's in pain. And that's why I encourage caregivers who have to speak up. They have to speak up when there's an injustice. We have to say, hey, listen to me. I need help. My loved one needs help. Yeah.
It is so true. I think about my mom, who's of that generation, that you don't question the doctor.
Right.
And during COVID, she went in the hospital because anyway, the long and short of it was, I've been talking to her doctor for a while about she had lost a lot of weight since my dad had died, and he had never adjusted her blood pressure medicine. Every time I brought it up, he's like, oh, but she's stable. Well, you only see her once in a while. I see the way she interacts and how what I've come to realize was her blood pressure dropping, what was going on. So she's supposed to get released from the hospital, to get a call from the cardiologist. Her blood pressure had dropped so much when they got her up that they said, we're going to keep her. And I said to him, you have got to lower that blood pressure medicine. She is on too much. And he fought me about it. I said, no, you've got to do it. I can't get her primary care to do it. Betsy, she went from 60 milligrams of blood pressure medicine to none. So we do know the person we're caring for the best, and we do have to be that voice for them, particularly when they're not going to be it for themselves for whatever reasons. And that's the other thing. That's one of the other things about the book, Relationship Contract for Dementia Caregivers, why it's so important to get a diagnosis. The way my mom was acting with her blood sugar and her blood pressure drop, which was two things that were dropping at the same time, I thought, does she have dementia? Do I need to get her evaluated? So there are physical things that could be causing some of the behaviors you're noting. You need to rule them out and then get an actual diagnosis so you can get the help that you need. That's just so important. And I think we're busy. Dementia is something that's a scary word. We don't want to think about it or for ourselves and anyone else. And it's really, really easy to bury our head in the sand. And yet we really can't, because in the very beginning you were talking about the need for a POA and a healthcare directive. One of the questions I got from people were, how do you set a boundary with someone with dementia? And I'm like, well, if they're in the mild if they're in the mid to late stage, you can't. You can't
right.
set a boundary with someone with a memory impairment. But if they're in the early stages, particularly if they've just gotten a diagnosis, it is so important to make that first boundary with intentional language. How do you want to live out your life? And that's not just, I want to tell you how I want to die. That's, I want to be able to continue to do these things as long as possible. I want to be able to see this person. I want to be able to see my granddaughter, but I don't want my granddaughter to be my caregiver. Right? There's so many wonderful relationship healing conversations that you can have around setting boundaries that I wish people didn't avoid them.
It's so true. That is so true. If people would realize that, getting, I call it ducks in a row, is so helpful. Like, my mom, she's from that era. She didn't question the doctor. When my dad was diagnosed with dementia, I said, Ma, go to the lawyer and get power of attorney, medical, financial. Oh, no, I can't do that. Your father would get mad. I said, you're not taking anything away from Dad. You have it from when you need it. You're not taking anything away from him. But she did not do it until he had to be placed. And then she had to do it. It's, when Matt was diagnosed, and Matt was young, he was 56, I immediately went to a lawyer. I was very proactive. And I said, listen, I want to know what you want at the end of your life. Do you want a feeding tube? Do you not want a feeding tube? What do you want at the end of your life? And I wanted him to make those decisions while he still could. I didn't want to have to make that decision for him.
No, but in those conversations, you were making them together, and what a gift.
Right. Even asking him, and not that I'm morbid, folks, because I'm not. I'm just realistic. What do you want at your funeral, your service? What kind of music do you want? And I even talk about it now with my son. I just talked to him last week. I said, Josh, I want you to have a party. You can have a memorial service, celebrate my life. Have a party, whatever you want. whatever you like. And these are the songs that I want. We don't like to discuss these things, Deborah, but we have to. And that makes it easier on the family. Definitely makes it easier on the family so that they're not burdened with that decision, heart-wrenching decision, what would mom or dad want, and then you don't have arguments with the siblings. When my brother, thankfully he went to a lawyer. This is so weird. He went to a lawyer, had a living will done. Little did any of us know he would have actually needed it. So when my brother was my older brother, and was in the hospital, and he had sepsis and his bowel died, the doctor said, he would only have 10% chance of making it, and he would need 24/7 care and need all this, a trach, a feeding tube, colostomy. And I said, what did his, living will say? And my mom said he didn't want it. And I said, well, then I think we should follow his wishes. My mother didn't want my brother to live like that. She knew he didn't want to live like that. And so Bradley passed away. That was his wish, not to have all that. And I think, Deborah, people need to realize that even though we may not agree with what they choose, we have to respect it and honor it. That's their choice of what they want.
100%. 100%. And again, that's the gift. Well, like you said, first of all, because every family member brings something different, it should be no surprise if there's one family member in particular who's like, no, do everything that you can to save them. And that, that oftentimes is really based on a very troubling relationship that never had the opportunity to heal, right? Well, I'm sorry, but that's selfish on that person's part, right? To make someone else live the way they didn't want to because you've got unresolved issues. So having those conversations and having it down in black and white kind of makes it a non-issue. But again, it's during those conversations that there can be such healing for a relationship. And even moving forward, my mom was so funny. My dad was great. My dad's like, this is what I want, boom, 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 boom. It was easy. I tried to get my mother, I called her primary care physician and said, so I want, because they get paid now to talk about end-of-life wishes, right, having that advance directive in place. I said, I want you to talk to my mom about that. He's like, oh, okay. Well, she adored her doctor, and he didn't want to talk about it, so he sends a social worker that neither one of us knows in, and she just, checks stuff off on a paper and then sends it to me. He said, well, I'll have this discussion and bring it back. And I'm like, that was not helpful at all. I was livid. Tried to have a discussion with my mom. She's like, oh, you know what I want. I'm like, Mom, that's not good enough. Goes into the hospital during COVID, that same visit. The palliative nurse calls me and says, do your mother have advance directives? And I said, I am embarrassed to tell you she does not, since I'm in the industry. I said, what I really want her to have is a post form, the physician's order of life-sustaining equipment. And she says, I'll talk to her about it. Do you know she signed one? It was the person who was a third party that was not emotionally involved that allowed her to say yes to that and to sign it. And that's the other thing to think about. If you can't or they can't, it's okay to take yourself out of the mix and have somebody that they trust talk to them about it. It could be a person of their faith community. It could be a sibling. It could be a physician. It could be a palliative nurse. But I was so grateful that she actually was willing to sit down and talk about that with someone and make these choices. And in the end, by the grace of God, we didn't need it because she died peacefully and in her sleep. But I slept peacefully knowing that document was in place and I wouldn't have to make those decisions.
Yes, absolutely. Matt's primary care, we already had a living will, but he gave us a form. Mm-hmm. And he signed it. He knew that I didn't want Matt resuscitated. and, you write down what you want as far as, like, comfort care. And I'll tell you what, I am grateful, like on Facebook or YouTube, I am seeing hospice nurses educate about the end of life, what to expect. And I wish that I had that information before Matt died. And I worked as an LPN, but we were not taught really the whole intense dying process, nor the grieving process for that matter, but the dying process. And once you understand, that it's not good to feed them when they are dying, they don't need that, much guilt is relieved when we know what to expect. And this is, again, Deborah, where education comes from. I'm so grateful that people are now out here, information highway, educating people. Very grateful. It's time to take everything out of the closet and put it in the front. And you know what? I think it's excellent. We need to know what to expect. So I'll tell you what, Matt had a living will. I should have read that over and over and over again. If I would have read that over and over again, I would have saved myself a lot of unnecessary guilt. Because I felt guilty that he had a high fever and he wasn't getting IV fluids. Well, he couldn't. They don't do IV fluids in hospice. They don't need it. If I would have understood that, I would have saved myself some guilt. So that's why I always say, folks, educate yourself. It's so, so important. It will help you so much. And I wish I knew. You know that saying, I wish I knew back then what I know now?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Wouldn't. Hindsight is 20/20, right? Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I am so grateful for people like you, Deb, who are helping caregivers and helping others. It's so important. It's to me, it's like it's a love ministry. Yes, it is a business, but you have to have a heart of love to do what you do. You have to. You just, the connection and the passion that you have, and it makes a difference.
I will tell you, one of the things that always yes, this is what I'm trying to say. Caregiving is such a personal journey. When someone gives you the gift of letting you in their life so you can help them, it really is an honor. It really is, because it's such a personal journey, and there's so many pieces that go into it. One of my big pet peeves is healthcare and everybody else defines caregiving as a series of tasks, right? It's the activities of daily living and the instrumental activities of daily living. That's what caregiving is. Caregiving is emotional, and it's the emotions that make us sick. It's not the tasks. And if we don't recognize how emotional it is and name them and claim them, you can't change them. And in particular, caregiving grief runs through caregiving like a river for the entire time, particularly for dementia caregivers. And it's the ambiguous grief and the anticipatory grief that no one talks about. And if we did, the grief that we feel that comes out as anger and resentment would not be. Because grief is actually a motivation for a lot of the other emotions that we feel. And until we name them, until they're given as much weight as giving somebody a shower, caregivers are being done a disservice.
True. Deborah, That's precious nuggets that you just said right there. It's so true. That's golden nuggets right there, folks. I agree 100%. We have so many emotions as a caregiver. People don't talk about after the caregiving journey, caregiver post-traumatic stress. Yes, it is a real thing. And I just think that, we need to talk about this. You're absolutely right. Grieving and how we feel. And that's why I would go in my car and do videos. I spoke about how I felt. And I think, I've joined a lot of caregiving groups when I first went on Facebook because I had no support for so many years. And I'm thinking, wow, there's people here that are going through the same thing, and they're talking about it. And we think we're alone. And people go into underground caregiving groups, Debra, because they're afraid of saying how they feel because of judgment. And that's not right, folks. People have a right to express how they feel, whether they think caregiving sucks, whether they think it's wonderful, whether they think it's both. This is reality. And I couldn't believe in caregiving groups that I would see other caregivers judge someone for placing their spouse or their parents. We can't always take care of our loved ones at home. We'd like to, but we can't always do that, and that's okay.
Say that again, Betsy. Say that again.
We can't always take care of our loved ones at home, and that's okay.
That is so critical for dementia caregivers to hear, and part of the reason why you want to have those upfront conversations. Because if you can say, if something happens and I can't take care of you at home, what would you want the community to be like? Right? So and one of the things we need to be very, very careful of as caregivers is promising the person we care for something we don't know we can deliver.
Amen.
Because they're feeling vulnerable. In that moment of vulnerability, we'll say, oh, yeah, no, I'll keep you at home. Oh, yeah, no, I'll never do this. You can't make promises. It's one of the reasons when my mom, we kept my my mom in our family home for 7 years, and then I started getting ill because of caregiving. And when I went to my mom and said, okay, we have to change something, I'm getting sick, she said, your health is not worth my staying at home. Let's talk about where I can go. Well, I never, ever expected my mother to say that to me, to be perfectly honest. I really didn't. But part of it is, when my dad first died, one of the first things she said to me is, I can't leave my home. I can't leave my home. It would be leaving your father. I said, all right, so let's figure out what we need to do to keep you at home. But I never promised her I would. What I said to her is, Mommy, we will keep you in this house for as long as we can. But if you ever need to go into a wheelchair full time, you can't stay here because we can't fix the house so it fits a wheelchair down the hallways and into your bedroom and into the bathroom. We don't have the money for it. So I need you to keep as strong as you possibly can using your walker so we can keep you in this house. Don't ever promise something in a moment of vulnerability, because if you can't deliver it, you will feel guilty and the other person feels betrayed.
Yes. Amen. I said that many times in my videos that I used to do in my car and even on Chatting with Betsy. We don't have a crystal ball. And sometimes our loved ones need more care than what we could give them. Sometimes it's our health. We can't. It's safety issues. And it's okay to know your limitations even. Like, I can't change, my husband's diaper, my wife's diaper. That's fine. That's good that you know your limitations. Then place them. And, Debra, I don't understand how adult children can actually say to their parent, don't put, mom or dad in a home. We want the money for our inheritance. And I've heard stories about this. I would say, you know what, I don't know you anything, sweetheart. You were taking care of for 18 or whatever years you lived in my house. I encouraged my mom to place my dad after he had fractured his hip. He was in rehab. I told my mom she's going to have difficulty taking care of him. Of course, I'm the rotten child, and she thought I was terrible for saying that. But she did try to take him home to relieve herself of guilt, but she had to place my father. But we encouraged my mom. It's okay to place Dad. We don't want to lose you, too. And I tell people this, Debra, caregivers, you have a right to enjoy life now. You have a right to enjoy life after caregiving. But you won't be able to enjoy a life after caregiving if you don't do self-care. And that is, I say this, I might be harsh. I'm my father's daughter. I'm a Jersey girl. Self-care is a matter of life and death, literally. Your life, your death. Because caregivers are stressed. They're dying from stress. And we need to take care of ourselves. That's not selfish, folks.
No, in fact, Amy Matthews, who is a dementia educator and consultant and an all-around amazing human being, said to me, and it's in the book, the most important equation in this care partnership is you, the caregiver. It's not the person you're caring for. It's not the rest of the family. It's not the neurologist. It is you. And everything you do needs to be centered around preserving your health mentally and physically. And you don't get that message.
That's true. That is so true. Debra, I'm going to have you on again. You are just a wealth of information, of resource, of wisdom, and sage advice. This is so wonderful. I love chatting with you.
Oh, my gosh, I love chatting with you as well. Anytime. I'd love to be a guest of Betsy again, anytime.
This is wonderful. Where can people purchase your books? Amazon? No, you're on Amazon.
Out on Amazon. Yep. And if you just search by my name, Debra, Debra, and then Hallisey, Hallisey, the books will come up. Yep, but it's all on Amazon.
You have a Facebook page, and all this information, folks, will be in the blog. You have a Facebook page, Advocate for Mom and Dad, which is on Facebook. And can you give your website, Debra, which will also be in the blog?
Absolutely. So it's the always www, and then it's advocateformomanddad.com. And so every word is spelled out, both the word and the D in and the D in dad. Advocateformomanddad.com.
Folks, I would definitely contact Debra, and I would get her books, because if anyone knows what it's like, Debra does. And she has years of caregiving experience, training, and I wish I knew of you, Debra, about 5 years ago. I would have contacted you to consult with about Matt. I wish I knew you.
Thank you.
You're welcome back then. And
yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say I wish I knew you then, because I enjoy, I think you're amazing. But
thank you.
Thank you for that.
Oh, you're welcome. And I didn't promise Matt. I have to say this. People heard it. I'll say it again. I never promised Matt I would take care of it at home. He didn't want it to be placed. And he would say to me that he would run away or kill himself. And I would say, Matt, I can't promise you that. And I said, I can't promise you. Some way, somehow, I'm telling your story to the world. That I can promise you. Placing you, I can't promise you that. But it worked out that he didn't have to be placed. God took him home. And that was a blessing, that he didn't have to be placed. So, but you know what? If he would have lived longer, yes, I would have had to. Without a doubt, I would have had to have placed Matt. because he was getting to where Josh and I couldn't do it anymore. And I'm grateful that, God took him home and he didn't have to be placed. And some people might say, oh, Betsy, that sounds terrible. No, it's not terrible. My husband suffered, and I didn't want him to suffer anymore. And, God's timing is always perfect. That's up to you whether you believe in God or not. I'm not telling you what to believe, but that's what I believe. And God knew when to take him home. But I want to thank you, Debra Hallisey, for coming on. I want to spell Debra's last name, Hallisey. And if you need a caregiving consultant, you need to want to read books, I would definitely check out Debra's books on Amazon. I would go on her website. I would join her Facebook. Is it a Facebook group or is it a business page, Debra? I forgot.
It's a business page.
Go on the business page because it has a lot of information. Great information, great resources, and I am honored to have you on show and have to have you on again this year. So thank you so much, Debra Hallisey, for being a guest and chatting with Betsy and all you do for helping caregivers. I thank you.
You're welcome, and it's an honor to be your guest and to be able to help any listener that I can.
Oh, thank you. Folks, I, again, love what I do. I'm here for you. I'm here to provide resources. Please subscribe to Chatting with Betsy. It is free on Spotify, Spreaker, iHeart. And share the show to help other people, because the more this show gets shared, the more people get helped. And it's honoring my husband's memory, because Matt is the inspiration and always will be the inspiration of why I do what I do. And it's all really because of Matt that I'm doing what I do. So I just would appreciate it if you would subscribe, share, and to thank you if you do subscribe. And if you do share, thank you. I appreciate it. And everything about Debra, the information will be in the blog, so please read the blog. Jeannie White, who's station manager, writes the blog, produces the show. Thank you, Jeannie White. And I want to thank Lillian Caldwell, who's CEO of Passionate World Talk Radio, who makes this all possible. And I want to thank you again, the listeners. I'm very grateful. And I can't help but sound redundant, because I want people to know they are not alone. I want people to know there's resources. I wish I knew about resources. I wish I knew that I wasn't alone. It took me 14 years without support. And when I went on Facebook to join Facebook support groups, to know I wasn't alone. I don't want anyone out there in the world to go through 14 years of no support. I have a support group, #Kick Alzheimer's Ass Movement, on Facebook. Debra's a member. It is for anyone. You do not have to be a caregiver. You can be a caregiver. You can be a post-caregiver. You do not have to have Alzheimer's, any dementia. Come get supported, get educated, vent. Everyone is welcome to join #Kick Alzheimer's Ass Movement. And if you want to follow me on Facebook, it's Betsy E. Wurzel, Wurzel. You could get a glimpse of my life. And I mostly post about Alzheimer's awareness, because that's my passion. And you will see pictures of Josh and I, and you'll see Matt's journey on my Facebook page. And thanks again for listening. And as I always say at the end of my show, in a world where you could be anything, please be kind, shine your light bright, because if we all did that, it would be a much happier, brighter world. Until we chat again, everyone, take care. This is Betsy Wurzel, your host of Chatting with Betsy on Passionate World Talk Radio. Bye-bye now.